Hey everyone, it's Aspen, your host for Forestry Talks, and you already know we're the podcast that explores all things forestry in Alberta. We're kicking off 2025 with a brand new season, and the theme that we're going to be digging into this year is all about Alberta Forest Products as solutions. Now, this could be solutions to the economy and affordability, solutions to reducing emissions when it comes to construction and infrastructure development, solutions to replacing other products derived by non-renewable resources, or a whole lot more. And I'm so thrilled to be kicking off the first episode of our new season with a very special returning guest, AFPA's very own President and CEO, Jason Krips. Jason, thanks for coming back on the show.
Aspen, thanks for the invite. Super excited about our conversation this afternoon.
Yeah, me too. And I have to say, this is so fun for me. I don't know how many people get to sit their boss down for 20 to 30 minutes and pick their brain about their job and then broadcast that to everybody. So thanks for playing along and being a good sport.
Oh, absolutely.
It's been a while since we last talked. Tell me a little bit about some of the standouts from 2024.
So I think it's almost been a couple of years since we've last done the podcast together. And so I have a little bit of both 2023 and 2024 in my head. And I would say, the last 18 months to 2 years, wildfire certainly has been a predominant theme, not only for the forestry sector, but I would say nationally, as a number of jurisdictions have struggled with really bad wildfires. Now, 23 was much worse than 24 in terms of scope and scale of fires, but 24 certainly stands out from the catastrophic wildfires in the Jasper Park and in particular the Jasper town site. So that's certainly top of mind for me as I look back at 24 and a little bit of 23.
So, and we've of course talked about wildfire on the show a few times, especially at our AGM series, because of course we had to move off from having our big conference in Jasper to Banff. So there's super topical at the time. But what we haven't really talked about is what has the association been doing in response? Can you maybe shed a little bit of light on that?
Absolutely. So at the end of the 2023 wildfire season, we actually hired a couple of consultants, and they met with a number of our members that were impacted and affected by the wildfires to really understand what they experienced and in turn what I think we all could learn from their experience on the ground and where we could work with the provincial government and the wildfire experts to improve practices coming forward. And so we ended up actually submitting that report into Minister Lowen, our forestry minister, at the end of 2023. And I have to really give our provincial government and Minister Lowen in particular a ton of credit. They took a lot of our recommendations to heart. And we saw a substantial increase in resourcing available for the 2024 wildfire season and a lot more initial attack occurring, a lot more technology and innovation. I think there was some nighttime use of equipment that hadn't been done in the past. And that really helped in terms of getting ahead of the wildfire season for 2024. So want to give kudos to all of our members that participated in that process to actually bring those learnings to ourselves and share those with the provincial government. And a huge shout out to the provincial government for taking those recommendations forward. And we certainly saw the results in 2024.
Yeah, 100%. And I think, from my perspective, one of the most valuable things about that exercise that we talk a lot about is the importance of local knowledge. I think, as we've seen wildfires burning across the province, one of the things that we've definitely observed is the power of that knowledge that local forest professionals have when they're talking to, wildfire fighters and saying, hey, you can access this here, and this is where there's a lot of mature forest at risk, and identifying kind of those important features that are going to help them in their efforts.
Absolutely. And that's certainly one of the key messages that we talked into the report and received information from our members. That local knowledge, those experts are on the ground. They're living it and breathing it every day. They're out in the forest. They know what's old. They know what's in a mature forest versus a midlife versus a young forest. And being able to share that on the ground knowledge within the wildfire ecosystem certainly, I think, helps mitigate some of the wildfire risks.
Yeah, no doubt. So, of course, I don't want to talk about wildfire the whole time. Tell me about some of the other maybe standout moments from the last year or so.
Well, if I can just actually pivot quickly as we move off of wildfire, just the other thing that I think is really important to acknowledge, and provincial government certainly understands it, our industry understands it, is active forest management. Active forest management plays such a key role in helping to mitigate the wildfire risks. And as we've talked about previously, and I know a number of your guests have talked about, is the boreal forest, when it hits that 80 to 120 year 2-year time frame, it's really mature and becomes susceptible to pests, mountain pine beetle, and wildfire. And so what we want to do is make sure that we encourage our society to support us on active wildfire management or active forest management, so that we're getting rid of older stands, replacing them with young seedlings. And it's that whole renewable carbon cycle that's so important to the carbon sequestration cycle. Otherwise, if we're not actually harvesting those old trees, we're turning a carbon sequester into a carbon emitter. So other standouts in 2024, we were fortunate we had Minister Lowen join a number of our board members into Japan in the fall on a trade mission. And I know you were a key part of that mission going forward. So that certainly stand out, and trade has become a real focus for us over the last year, especially as we head into 2025 and looking forward of some of the tumultuous situations on the trade front with the United States. So the fact that we started to take in some steps last fall to look at market diversification, you know, that's certainly going to be a focus going forward. Not only market diversification, doubling down on showcasing our customers in the U.S. the importance of our product to their customers themselves, and reducing costs. If you have increased the tariffs or duties in the United States, that increase the cost of building with houses. Therefore, you know, adds to the inflationary pressures. So trade's going to be a focus for us. Last year, you know, we certainly put our foot in the water on market diversification. A plan to actually ramp that up significantly this year.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned the Japan mission. And I'm extra glad, Jason, that you've agreed to join me for even another episode in the coming weeks to talk about, you know, everything that happened in the mission to Japan and really unpack what our goals were there and what we achieved and all that kind of stuff.
Absolutely. Very much looking forward to that.
Yeah. And so talking about the trade file, I have learned more about trade than I ever thought I would in the last couple of weeks, but this is something that you've kind of been living and breathing for a while in this role, certainly with the softwood lumber, you know, duties that we've seen going on forever, and working with the Alberta Softwood Lumber Trade Council,
Correct. You got
ASLTC. Perfect. So tell me a little bit about what trade has looked like in your role at AFPA, and then of course we'll maybe get some reactions to the 25% Trump tariffs.
Absolutely. So what a lot of folks don't understand or don't maybe realize or recognize is that the lumber sector in Canada has been going through trade disputes for some time. So the last softwood lumber agreement that we had with the United States expired, if I'm not wrong, in 2016. There was a year standstill agreement in that agreement as it off-ramped. And then in 2017, we started as an industry on the lumber side getting hit with annual duties that are renewed and refreshed every year. And so we've been living in a duty situation in the lumber side of Canadian softwood since 2017. And so that has resulted in a number of duties accumulating into U.S. commerce. And so there's almost $10 billion worth of duties on deposits with U.S. commerce that have come from Canadian companies. And right now, our duty percentage in the situation right now is about 15% for Canadian companies. There is a very likelihood come fall, based on the annual review process, that we could be looking at a 30% duty rate for softwood lumber. That's separate and apart from the 25% situation that Trump has put out there. So we could be looking at almost a 55% between duties and tariff situation for Canadian lumber coming in into the United States, which I would argue is an existential crisis for our sector and our industry right across Canada. Now, that 25% could also apply to lumber, to pulp and paper. So all of a sudden, the trade file has become a huge focus for us as a sector, not only on the lumber front, but right across the sector, from lumber to pulp to paper and everything in between.
Yeah, and I'm so glad you touched on that, because I think it's really important for people and for governments to understand exactly the precarious position that we're in right now, because these could very likely be compounding tariffs, and we could see upwards of 50% tax on our lumber, which is a huge export product. Forestry products are one of the most vital industries to the Alberta economy. And so how much, Jason, do we export to the U.S.?
So from an Alberta perspective, about 50% of our product stays domestic within Canada. Of that other 50%, about 97% of that goes into the United States.
Yeah, wow.
So about 3% goes into other markets, including Japan. Now, Japan's an important market, even though it's albeit small. They pay premium for what's called J-grade lumber. But certainly from a lumber perspective, we're sitting almost at 50% of our production goes stateside. So it becomes a vitally important market, or is a vitally important market, but also one that we need to ramp up, showcasing to our customers down there how important our market is to their building needs.
We seem to have a little bit of a reprieve from the 25% tariffs. Talk to me a little bit about that and maybe what this has opened up for us, or just any reactions.
It's really hard to determine. So basically, in the run-up to January 20th and the inauguration of President Trump, he basically had signaled that day one, he was going to sign an executive order that would have 25%, up to 25% tariffs levied on Canadian and Mexican products coming in the United States. January 20th has come and gone. That didn't happen, but he did signal that he's now examining the trade deficits or perceived trade deficits with Canada, Mexico, and other countries, and may or may not attach tariffs to products coming in the United States. I would say it's such a fluid situation that we've even heard this week, subsequent to January 20th, that actually maybe February 1st where the tariffs come in. So I would say, unfortunately, we don't know yet. And I think there's really a couple of schools of thought. There's one that this is just an opening salvo for renegotiations of the Canada-US-Mexico trade agreement that President Trump signed in his first term in office. That was the renegotiation of the old NAFTA, North American Free Trade Agreement. That's one school of thought, and this is just part of the bargaining process. The other is that you have a completely different trade dynamic that President Trump and his administration are trying to do in the geopolitical space related to to trade tariffs. Not sure where that falls out, which school of thought is going to actually land. And unfortunately, we probably are not going to know for some time. But regardless, that just reinforces our need to talk to the decision maker, to our customers down in the United States about the importance of our product to their business models, and working with them to then talk to their decision makers about ensuring that we have minimal tariffs or duties coming in from our products. Yeah.
So Jason, tell me a little bit about what this could look like for the pulp and paper side of the sector. Because of course, as we know, the lumber side has been seeing these duties through softwood lumber tariffs for a while, but this is a little bit new for that side.
This is certainly new for pulp and paper. Should, in fact, the Trump administration follow through with 25% or any percentage. And I see pulp not unlike our oil and gas that's getting used in the United States. So oil and gas is very much a feedstock. We produce a lot of heavy crude here in the province, and that goes down to the Gulf Coast as a feedstock for further refining. Very similar to what happens on our pulp side, a factor difference, in terms of the volume, but important for our sector. Pulp will go into a number of factories in the United States for the use of toilet paper, paper towel, Kleenex, you name it, that utilizes pulp.
Medical supplies.
So what's going to happen is, quite likely, is those manufacturers, assuming they take on our product still at the increased price point, they will pass that on to their consumers. So again, you're going to see an inflationary factor coming into a lot of the consumer products that are utilizing our pulp that are produced in the United States.
Yeah, and so that exact kind of statement that you just shared right there is a big part of, I guess, the value proposition that we've been trying to articulate to our friends south of the border, and a big part of kind of our strategy as we go through this, process with the US. So talk to me a little bit about why it's important for us to articulate our value proposition and what that is.
Absolutely. So you can unpack value proposition in a couple of different buckets. Number one, jobs. So because a lot of the manufacturing of the end products that our pulp uses into the U.S., that the manufacturing sector relies very much on our pulp. So without that pulp coming in, you've got jobs at risk in the United States. From a lumber perspective, the United States is a big market, as we've talked about for us, but they cannot self-supply. So prior to the last softwood lumber agreement ending, we supplied about 30 to 33% of the U.S. market lumber, so they could more or less supply about 70% internally within their
Canada.
own. Yeah, Canada supplied about 33%.
About 33%, yeah.
That's right, of the U.S. lumber market. We've dropped down to anywhere between 23 and 24 to 25% of lumber that U.S. Needs comes from Canada. So we have shrunk over the last 7-8 years, but the void for the most part has not been filled by the U.S. domestic market. Maybe a little bit of an uptick, and yes, they've had a couple of mills in the deep U.S. South certainly grow, but that gap has actually been filled predominantly from European customers.
Yeah.
And so those European customers aren't actually getting charged a duty coming in with their products. So we do believe, and the numbers do prove out, we believe that the United States needs our lumber because they cannot supply their lumber needs all through their own domestic production.
Yeah, and so what's really interesting about that, Jason, is that, remarking on how our market share might have gotten a little smaller over the last little while over the duties, that hasn't created any benefit to the American consumer at all.
If it has, it's been marginal, we would argue.
Yeah.
Yes, they've had a little bit of bump in terms of their production, but a lot of that void has been filled by other countries.
Exactly. And they're not charging, their costs aren't lower, right? They're not selling their lumber at a cheaper rate to the American consumer because, of course, they're not going to get into that market unless it's the cost is appetizing for them.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
So yeah, really interesting piece there, I think, on the affordability context and then the jobs context of, well, we know hundreds of thousands of jobs are supported by Canadian lumber on both sides of the border, which is significant. Sectors like infrastructure, transportation, you name it, and harming their supplies puts those jobs at risk.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah, and so another side of the value proposition, Jason, that I'm hoping we can unpack is, of course, about their supply and how they need affordable lumber to be able to build homes in the States. And we're seeing maybe some pressures that might make that a little bit more important for them recently.
Absolutely. Well, and if the Trump administration goes through with the 25% tariffs, you're going to see continued inflationary pressures, and therefore it's not going to be as inexpensive, or it's going to be more expensive to actually build housing. So the fact that you have duties of 50%, possibly up to 30% by the fall on lumber, couple that with another 25% potentially, there is going to be inflation where it's going to be not as easy for the U.S. home builders to build because they won't have the consumers accessing their homes simply because it'll be too expensive for them to purchase homes.
Well, and we already knew that, looking at the States, there's a bit of an uptick in the amount of homes that they're hoping to build in the next year, outside of some of the natural disasters that they've experienced in the last year that they need to be able to compensate or meet the demand for. So, we've seen huge weather events that have taken out a number of homes. Right now, the California wildfires, right? There's going to be significant rebuilding efforts, and there's no mistake that Canadian lumber is going to need to be able to fill that demand.
Absolutely. Absolutely. We feel that, from that value proposition perspective, we've got a great product that's easy to build with, that's lighter framed than the southern yellow pine that's produced in the southern United States. It's a great product, and we feel that we can fill that need, whether it's natural disasters or just the high demand of housing starts that the United States has.
Yeah, 100%. And so to kind of continue on the strategy, I think articulating our value proposition, the value proposition of Canadian forest products to the U.S. Market is significant. But I think there's another part of our strategy as well, which starts at home. Talk to me a little bit about what that looks like.
Absolutely. Part of our mitigating strategy on the trade front is to actually have domestic use increase, whether that's having a potential wood charter so that we have a more focus on the use of wood and forestry products here in the province or across Canada. We certainly have a housing crisis here in Canada. We think that if a federal government would look to us as an industry to increase our use of wood that could actually help mitigate some of the housing challenges that we have. So part of our mitigating strategy with respect to trade is actually more domestic use of Alberta and Canadian wood.
Yeah, I think that's so huge. I mean, we know, of course, that the forest product sector is one of the most important industries in Alberta, right? I think, and I'm a bad comps person, Jason, I should have had these numbers handy, but something like
we're $14 billion worth of economic impact for the province of Alberta. We're about 30,000 jobs.
You got it.
GDP is around just shy of $6 billion. The tax that we've been able to provide into the provincial coffers for building of building of hospitals, roads is between $750 to $800 million, depending on the year. So we're a substantive industry for the province, not only from an employment perspective, but for a tax-based perspective, and just stability, especially in Northern Alberta for families.
Yeah, incredibly so. And I mean, nationally on an even larger scale, the Canadian forest sector is one of the largest employers in Canada, period. So I love this strategy of looking at encouraging more use of a product that we grow right here at home that is sustainable when we're looking at new construction starts and infrastructure development. How can we support an industry that's so important to our economy? And it's building more wood right here at home.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Nice. And so there's another piece even still to our get work done at home strategy to support the sector in these times of uncertainty with tariffs. Talk to me a little bit about some of that work with the government.
That's ensuring that we have a regulatory framework that is actually seamless, that reduces red tape, and allows us to actually manage our forests in a way that ensures renewability, ensures that we can get on the landscape, harvest the old timber, and in turn then replant seeds. We grow about 3 trees for every tree that we harvest. And so ensuring that we have low regulatory burden, but in an environmentally sustainable way, allows us to actually have a seamless and an efficient system for us to continue to support the environment and the economy.
Yeah, fantastic. And I mean, that's something that we really need to look at critically right now is if it's going to become, incredibly more expensive for our sector, incredibly more expensive or challenging for us to access a market that takes 50% of our product. How can we make things a little bit more affordable for us to operate at home? And how can we ensure that forestry continues to be competitive?
Absolutely. And we're very fortunate. We've got a provincial government that actually sees the value of our industry and works very close with us to find and share with each other where we feel that there are some hurdles that we bring down in order for more efficient production of forest and obviously more efficient renewal.
Yeah. Great. So I want to talk a little bit about, because of course we've spent a lot of time on trade, and I think that's going to be one of the biggest priorities, certainly at the start of this year, but likely to continue through 2025. But what are some of the other big things that we can expect or opportunities or challenges for the sector and the association in 2025?
Obviously, we're likely heading into a federal election this year in 2025. So we really are ramping up our messaging around some of the issues we see from the federal perspective, where we maybe are seeing some hurdles that are preventing us from actually getting on the landscape and actually reducing some fire risks. So we're certainly ramping up advocacy on that front. Absolutely.
And what would some of those barriers look like?
The Species at Risk Act is a well-meaning, well-intended act, but I would suggest flawed because it doesn't take into account regional differences across the country.
Yeah.
And it also looks at a species-by-species approach as opposed to a multi-value proposition. So our foresters manage the landscape for multiple factors: soil, water, air, trout, caribou, you name the species.
Yeah.
And the fact that the species at risk kind of stacks one species onto the other, there are certain species that actually need old growth. There are certain species that, like bears, need a younger forest to thrive. So what we're hoping to do is whoever takes control of the federal government once the election occurs, that we have a government that understands that it's a very complex landscape to navigate when you're looking at when and where and how to harvest, and that they'll allow and work with us to determine a multi-valued approach to the harvesting and replenishing of the landscape.
Yeah, great. Awesome. Well, Jason, this has been a super meaty discussion. Lots of stuff to get into. Of course, trade is super topical right now, but you're going to be joining me for another episode or another interview very shortly to unpack our trade mission to Japan, which I can't wait for. Before we wrap up, any final thoughts you'd like to share?
No, just thank you very much for your time and love this platform, Aspen. It's going to be a selfish plug for AFPA, but I really feel that Aspen does a fantastic job on our podcast, and just thrilled to be a guest with you.
Thanks, Jason. Appreciate that. Thanks for joining me for another episode of Forestry Talks, a podcast that explores all things forestry in Alberta. If you're curious to learn more, check out our website, albertaforestproducts.ca or loveabforest.ca. I'm your host, Aspen Dudzic, and I'll see you next time.
This series is proudly produced by the team at Road 55. Road 55 creates content that connects. For more information, visit our website at road55.ca.